Musicians of TikTok, you are never going to make a living selling albums or selling streams because we as a species have moved past that. That era is gone, it's over, and it's never coming back. And that's not a threat to music as an art form or as a cultural practice, as a human endeavor, because music does not need the recording industry to exist in order for music to exist, right? Humans have been making music for like hundreds of thousands of years. The recording industry is 100 years old at most. Hundreds of years from now, like some college students taking like obscure and niche cultural history classes will learn about the existence of the recording industry, and we'll hear about these things called records, CDs, and cassettes. But hundreds of years from now, most people will not even know that this was ever a thing that humans did. That's hard for us to imagine because you and I grew up in a world where the word musician meant somebody who writes original songs or creates original arrangements of like pre-existing songs, records them, sells the recordings in the hope that later on people will pay money to go see you perform those original songs or original arrangements live. And that's what the word musician meant. But that's not what the word musician used to mean, and it's not what it's going to mean in the next 100 years. We don't know over the next like couple hundred years what that word musician is going to mean. We're still groping around in the dark and throwing spaghetti at the wall trying to figure out what that word is going to mean, but it's definitely not going to mean somebody who makes a living selling records. But people will still want music and need music, right? When they invented the refrigerator, it took down the icebox industry, but the invention of the refrigerator did not mean that people had less of a demand or less access to chilled foods because their icebox was gone. You see what I mean? A musician might just become a type of social media influencer or a content creator in the future. We just don't know. I think probably one of the most successful musicians of this era is Rick Beato, right? And a lot of people don't know who I'm talking about, but if you're like a music nerd or a recording studio type of person or a guitar nut, you've seen a lot, you've watched hours of his videos. 100 years ago, we used to have several musicians' labor unions. And you'd say, wait a minute, why would a musician need a labor union? Well, it's because 100 years ago, the word musician didn't mean an artist who was creating art and putting their art out in the world. The word musician meant somebody with a technical skill, that they could play a musical instrument. Like 100 years ago, it was really common for bars and restaurants to pay for musicians to come hang out and play, but also for grocery stores, just randomly on a weekday, would have bandstands set up in there. It was very common back 100 years ago for shops, hardware stores, whatever, clothing shops, to pay musicians to just stand outside on the corner and just play, just to like get attention to their shop, and kind of as a form of advertising. So a musician was just somebody who knew like how to carry a tune, basic, on a trumpet or a piano or whatever, and knew like the top 40 hits of the day, and were just played to show. Like imagine any scenario where like it would make sense to have a Bluetooth speaker on with like somebody's like a Pandora station running. That's, people usually just pay humans to show up and play musical instruments at those sort of scenarios, and that's what a musician was. So we have this word musician, but the word doesn't mean the same thing in every era, and we're living in a transitional era where we're gone past this thing that it like revolves around albums and recordings and singles and radio stations and Casey Kasem top 40 hits. That's what it used to mean, and you and I grew up in an era when that's what that used to mean, so we think that that's what it's always going to mean, and that's what it always meant. That's not what the word musician means anymore. We're going into a new era. We just don't know what it's going to be. But I know what it's not going to be. It's not going to be selling records. So I had made a video about how I think like the recording industry is a completely dead industry. Streaming is a completely dead industry. And both Matt and Pierre left a comment about how it's important to have like other revenue streams as a musician, right? Like being able to do lessons, doing session music, doing live shows, all that sort of stuff. And yes, absolutely. I agree. Got it. But that's like level one of what I'm talking about. We can get even more abstract and even weirder. So like imagine you're writing a science fiction story that's going to take place 400 years in the future, and you have these people in this future that you're imagining that are called musicians and know how to like use musical instruments, right, to create music. But they're not even aware or thinking about or living in a reality where that can even be about making money. there still would be reasons to play music. Yeah, there's like the personal expression and the artistic satisfaction, but also music is a way of drawing attention to yourself. It's a way of getting clout. It's a way of getting status. It's a way of getting access. It's a way of getting community. Like, imagine you are a very political person and you have a political message that you want to get out into the world. And let's say you have a little money. You could spend that money on helping to get your message out. You could buy some ad space online. You could pay to have a public speaking class. You could pay to throw a convention where we're all going to talk about your ideas. Or you could take that money and buy a guitar and a PA system, and you can start writing political songs. You could write the political songs and post the chords over top of your head and encourage people to sing your songs and perform your songs in their own shows and on the street as a way of spreading your political message. You could stand on the street corner and sing Solidarity Forever and a bunch of Pete Seeger tunes. You could learn how to play old-time banjo and wear a keffiyeh to every single jam session. In these scenarios, the music is just a tool that you're willing to spend money on, that's there to help you achieve some other goal, right? Like maybe you're an anti-fascist person, but you're an anti-fascist person who uses music to do your anti-fascism, to enact your actual political agenda. I'm talking about scenarios where like your musicianship is not a craft or a skill or even a type of art. It's a tool that you are using to achieve a completely separate goal, a cultural goal, a social goal, a political goal. You guys have all seen me on TikTok doing Irish and American folk songs using instruments that are not traditionally associated with that particular style of music, right? Like I'll play Irish folk tunes and use a slide guitar, Shruti box, synthesizers, whatever. In my mind, that's not just about music. That's like literally a political act. I have a real personal problem with the way a lot of people view the concept of tradition. I think a lot of people have this mindset that tradition means like we pick some random conflated group of years in the past and we're going to cosplay as that person. I don't agree with that interpretation. I think that's problematic, and I think it's also illogical and irrational, right? Like you're cooking up these non-existent versions of the past. It's ahistorical. I view tradition as you're taking something from your predecessor and you're moving it forward. Like, I think you are less of a traditionalist if you are not reframing the old stories and the old messages and the old songs in a contemporary way. I'm saying, like, not just our future musicians going to be people who don't make money off of records. I'm going to say future musicians might not even be people who are in it to make money. They might not even be in it to make art. They might be in it for some completely other concept, one that we might not even be able to conceive of right now here in the year 2025. So I had made a video about how I think the recording industry is like just generally toast at this point, and Matt the Blast leaves this comment saying that most of his gigs were at the Renaissance Fair this year. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because in the original video I was going to start talking about the Renaissance Fair, but then I was like, no, then I'll end up yammering for 9 minutes on this one TikTok. But I was thinking about the Renaissance Fair because over the summer, my FYP is full of people, you know, playing at the Renaissance Fair, clips from the Renaissance Fair, that sort of stuff. And it dawned on me that that is a really unique place for musicians to play, because of the contrivance of the Renaissance Fair, that we're trying to create like this artificial kind of feeling of an ancient past. It's one of these weird scenarios where a Bluetooth speaker doesn't really substitute for you, right? Like, in a way, you're not getting paid for your music. You're getting paid for the vibe that you give off, for dressing up in the garb, showing up with a harp and playing some music, right? Like, it's kind of like at the Renaissance Fair, like paying for a live musician, you're kind of like being rented as a set piece, right? Like, or like kind of like a human animatronic, to the point that like the particular music that you play kind of might not matter, right? Like, if you are making a record, if you're making an album and you've got like one track on there that's from a different century from the rest, someone's gonna leave a comment about it, right? But like at the Renaissance Fair, like, you could be playing like Chappell Roan songs, and as long as like you're looking the part and giving off the vibe of the old timiness or whatever, it fits, right? So I'm thinking that musicians need to
that's like a thing that we could like hunt out a little bit. Like, what are other places to play where you're not really being paid necessarily to play music? You're being paid to give off a vibe, right? And you're using the music, you're using your instrument and your repertoire as a tool to give that vibe, to sell the vibe. So, you know, I was thinking this year about like, man, I wish there was more like live musicians that get incorporated into haunted houses. I think that would be cool, right? Craft fairs, apple orchards, whatever. Theater, like local theater troops, like could have somebody who has no lines but is just like paid to sit in the corner and play a harp during like, you know, Shakespeare in the Park or something like that, just to like be a human set piece, just to like help set the mood, the vibe, the tone. And in a case where, you know, and it's a case where like your set list doesn't need to be prepared. You can just sit there and just start winging it through your repertoire, and you're still going to like do the job right? You're still going to like achieve the goal, because the goal isn't your tunes. The goal is the atmosphere you give off from just being like that lone harpist in the corner. So yeah, this is creative. This is what I'm talking about. This is like other ways to music, other ways to be a musician, other ways to like use music and perform music, whatever. That's what I'm thinking about right now. We have this old model of a musician. A musician is somebody who makes albums and sells live shows, and I think that model is done, and we're moving on. And it's, you know, and that model is pretty new. That model has only been around since like my grandparents' time, and I think that model is done, and we're moving on to a new one. But we don't know what the new one is going to look like yet. And this is part of the science of, you know, researching what that model is going to be. This is very funny, and it would probably work too, just setting up randomly at the Renaissance Fair and start busking. And if anyone like asked you about it, you can just be like, oh, Dave said I could set up here. And people will be like, oh, all right. I don't know who Dave is, but that guy seemed very confident that Dave told him he could set. I guess I got other stuff to worry about. This comment reminds me of back when I was in the Army. We called it the Sergeant Martinez scam, because like every American military unit has at least one guy named Sergeant Martinez in it. So if we like ran out of office supplies when we were on post, you know, we needed like a ream of paper for our printer or something like that, we just go over to some other random unit, knock on the door, be like, hey, where's your supply shop? Okay, so go over there, knock on the door at the supply, and like some private would show up and be like, hey, can we get a ream of paper? Sergeant Martinez says it was cool for you to give us a ream of paper. Our supply guy is going to trade you for some other stuff. And I was going, oh, okay, yeah, sure. Sergeant Martinez says it's cool, because there's always a Sergeant Martinez. And occasionally it didn't work. But every single time that it happened, people, I'd be like, hey, Sergeant Martinez. Like, Sergeant Martinez? You mean Sergeant Hernandez? I'd be like, oh, casual racism. Yeah, that's who I meant.